Great, we'll get going. Hello everybody, welcome to the second show and tell for this Housing Repairs Alpha project. I'll give a little introduction to the project, and then the aim of this session is for us to demonstrate the work that we've been doing in the last 2 weeks, and answer any questions you might have. So this is the team that's been working on the project from DXW. So I'm Alex Yedigarov, Transformation Manager.
Deb Sturridge, designer.
Daria, service designer.
Vita, our user researcher, and James, our technical architect, can't be with us today. But importantly, we're working as a team across Southwark, Greenwich, South Kesteven and Lincoln. So we are working across all 4 councils in order to carry out this alpha to understand what a common pattern for housing repairs would look like. We've got a couple of guiding stars that are guiding this work. These are our visions. So we have a vision for residents that we set at the start of the project. This vision is so for resident, if I need a repair in my home or a communal area, I can easily and confidently find information about how to resolve it, request and book a repair, and understand what will happen and by when. For organisations, if a resident needs a repair in their home or communal area, the correct diagnosis can be easily made so the right people with the right tools can fix the problem in the right timescale. So these are the visions that anchor our work, and these are ultimately the goals that this work should be aiming towards. We are working in an alpha phase at the moment, so this diagram sort of demonstrates how the different phases of digital development hang together. So a piece of discovery work was already done into this problem last year. And that work was to get under the skin of the problem, to understand really what the user needs are, to conduct enough research to determine if this is a problem that's likely to have solutions that will be able to fix it. In Alpha, we are building prototypes and testing different ideas, and the idea of this is that we're testing the riskiest assumptions. So what are the things that really need testing at this point in order to understand, can this service be built in real life, in the wild? If that's the case, then that would go into a beta phase. Hello. Importantly, this alpha is about a service pattern. So what is a service pattern and what makes a service pattern common? A service pattern is best practice for providing a service that meets user needs. What it doesn't do is require uniformity. It doesn't mean that we're looking at a single system that all councils will use. What it means is some councils could adopt all or part of a pattern. If they have a digital development team, they could be able to adopt part of a pattern or the whole thing. Also, existing suppliers can adopt the pattern and adapt their products to better meet user needs. That would also be a good result. This is an example of a service pattern. So this is a service pattern for applying for an older person's bus pass. It's available for any council to look at and to follow. The important thing to note about this example, which I showed in the last show and tell, is that it's for quite a straightforward transactional service. So in applying for an older person's bus pass, a resident knows the thing that they want to apply for, they apply for it, and the successful journey results in them getting that thing. So it's quite straightforward, and there's very few outcomes at the end. Housing repairs is much more complex because the information that a resident provides in the reporting journey means that many different things can happen as a result of that. Also, parts of the journey aren't linear. For example, diagnosis can happen in several different places, and jobs are often not completed on the first visit, so there might be multiple tradespersons that might be sending the resident back to earlier parts of the journey in order to go forward again. So because of that, we're defining where there are patterns in the different stages of the reporting and booking journey, rather than assuming that a single end-to-end pattern is the answer. So there could be patterns for checking eligibility, or a pattern for reporting the problem, or a pattern for checking availability. So these patterns in different stages mean that local authorities might be able to adopt parts of the overall. There could be constraints that prevent them at any particular point in adopting the whole thing. For example, we know that there are often technical constraints in transforming a housing repair service. So it could mean that different parts could be adopted at different points. In the discovery of this for this work, a outline pattern was created, and that pattern it's in these categories along the top: report, diagnose, appoint, log, schedule, etc. That's modelled on the steps from an organisational perspective and largely assumes a linear journey. It identifies the tasks and the data points that you might want to carry out or collect at different points, and some of the work we're doing now is helping to define more the how. So the how do you do one of the things one of the tasks that's outlined, and the why, because importantly, if you're following a pattern, if a pattern's published, you might not be able to follow it completely. You need to understand why certain things are recommended. Why is something recommended as best practice? If you do deviate from that, then you understand the reason it was there in the first place. So those are context. This sprint we've been carrying out observations of repairs services, carried out a cross-council design workshop. We've been doing some technical discovery and synthesising insights. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Daria.
So the thing that Alex just mentioned about observing a housing repairs service, so we went and visited both Lincoln and South Kesteven and observed how the teams work with these different types of systems and how they handle the different types of housing repairs requests. And so we learned the systems, tools and processes that each council uses and looked at some of the similarities between them and kind of just hear about their experiences and how the team sort of works in that way. So we found that there were some key sort of insights within that, in that people didn't really have a clear view of what completed really meant. So there's completed from the council's perspective and completed from the resident's perspective. So could it be a completed the job, completed the call, completed the repair? And so things that might be considered completed actually end up falling back into the system where they may not have been fully resolved to the residents' expectations. There's also a reliance on paper notes and folders to have information to hand really easily. That's really good in terms of for the agents to have things available to hand, but it does mean that in cases where information's updated, there's also like a lot of institutional knowledge that needs to be pulled up and dredged up, and that's not always kept up to date. There's no feedback loop at the moment between the trades and the customer services team in a lot of situations. So the trades might go and complete a job and find out some information that would benefit the customer services team when they next need to book that repair or do a follow-on for that repair. And equally, vice versa, there's information that the customer services receive but that isn't passed on to the trades. For example, any imagery that the customer sends through, that type of thing. Residents also lack visibility as to which stage they're at within that repairs process, and so often there'll be lots of follow-up calls just to chase their requests and find out where they are in that process. Online forms are currently handled in the same way as emails, so it's very manual, and the process doesn't really interact with any other systems, which I think could be sort of improved in that respect. Even if you start your journey online, you will be pushed into the call journey because calling is the default mode of communication in a lot of situations, and that's for really solid reasons of like saving time. But that does mean that if someone isn't able to call, it can kind of cause problems for the residents who have time restrictions. Hello, welcome. Reports also come from many different directions internally, so there'll be wardens, inspectors, housing officers, and each of these requests can sometimes take different formats, and those different processes don't necessarily adapt to suit all different situations. Repairs in that process can actually be dropped and fall out of the system, as the handoff between the different types of people that are handling the requests might then not actually fully make their way back. So we saw, for example, that councils send out experts to review what needs to be done. The expert reviews that repair, and then their feedback isn't taken through back into the system, so the council ends up sending another person to review that repair, and that can leave the residents stuck in a sort of eternal loop that costs the council money. Agents also context switch a lot. They move between multiple systems and have to enter the same information in different places, so that leads to like no single source of truth. And we feel that the agents at the moment aren't as engaged as they could in the alpha work, particularly as they could be. So we'd really like to focus on keeping the team informed and sharing the outputs of our work and actually asking for feedback from the people who are closest to the housing repairs service as it is. Sort of share our vision, explain what we're trying to do, and also help the people that have been giving their time to see how that's helping and pushing the project forward.
Right. Slight musical chairs. Okay, so like Alex said earlier, we've had a cross-council design workshop. So whilst we were in Grantham and Lincoln, sort of observing the customer service agents and seeing what they did, we also wanted to speak to colleagues in Southwark and Greenwich as well, just to see what their experiences were like and to see how much in common those processes were. So with the design workshop, we had eight council staff, like I said, from Greenwich and Southwark. We had a few aims. We sort of knew what we wanted to find out in these workshops. We wanted to, first of all, explore and visualise the common steps involved in reporting and repair. So we'd sort of seen like a pattern of like processes when we did our observations. We wanted to see how much in common that was with the other councils as well. What we did after the observations was sort of go away and create what we call a service workflow. So this is just a very simplified, stripped back decision-making diagram of what happens when a tenant makes a report, what kind of information is flowing through the system, so what are they offering, what are they giving in terms of what the report is, where they're located, and also what decisions the customer service agents are having to make about the reports that they receive, how do they prioritise the repair jobs, and who do they pass that on to. So we spent some time with both councils to sort of see what they thought about that. So what parts of that workflow sort of matched up with their experiences, what questions did they have, and what notes did they have as well. So they did add a bunch of things to that, you know, which we haven't completely finished synthesising, but once we do, we'll share that with everybody. The second aim of the workshop was to generate new ideas for dealing with a repair request. So the way that we did that was that we got everyone, we sort of split them up into two groups, and we got them to sort of sketch ideas. So that could have been like brand new ideas, things that we currently don't do, or just thoughts around how to improve the process. And it was really great seeing like both councils sort of like get together and sort of compare notes and make suggestions. So off the back of the sketching exercises, a few things came out, and I think we've seen these things come up time and again in our discovery work and in speaking to council staff. So it was nice to sort of confirm those things as being good ideas. One of them being an appointment booking calendar, which shows availability based on repair request priority. Another idea was a virtual image of property showing which property is located where. So this came out of the thought that depending on where a property is located in a building, it could help to diagnose a problem. Like if it's a leak problem, it helps to know if they have a flat above them or if it's a ceiling or something like that. So sort of a schematic representation might be useful to improving the repair process. Collect customer satisfaction feedback to help identify the areas or the parts of the service that need improvement. So this is more like just following up with the tenants and the residents to see what their experiences are like, identify any patterns in those in that feedback, and then use that as a way to sort of iterate your services and improve it. Use of photos and videos. So I think in the past when we'd spoken to people, mostly it came from, well, it helps if a resident can submit a photo of the problem because that will help us diagnose it better, but we were able to get a little bit more out of the workshop in terms of how photos and videos could be used. So we could use them to request to improve the repair process. So residents send in a picture of the issue as proof of any work done. So a contractor being able to show like this was the problem before they'd done the work and then what it looked like after they'd done the work. As proof of a contractor visit, so when a resident is out, if that's contested that they weren't available, the person didn't turn up, a picture might be useful in that instance, and to help explain what repairs a leaseholder can report. So if it's in a communal area, having a picture of these are the bits that you could possibly put a request for. Another suggestion was to reduce the number of available phone numbers residents can call to report a request. So I think there are instances where there are multiple different numbers that a tenant or resident might come to depending on where they were in the service as far as what they could call. So sort of limiting that might like just create some more clarity on what a report, the ways that a report might come in. So I think those were most of the suggestions, and sort of collated them and themed them. The third aim of the workshop was to just gain further insight to whether the current prototype gathers the required information So I don't know if everyone in the room has seen the prototype that we took in, I think it was a few weeks ago. We placed it in front of residents and we sort of tested it with them. We wanted to get some input from the people in the workshop about what they thought of the prototype, what bits they liked, what bits they felt needed improvement, and they were able to feed those things back. So they just put post-it notes on printouts of the different pages of the prototype and sort of ask questions. So in terms of the design crit, what they reported back was to ask more questions earlier in the journey to determine eligibility. So they thought the questions that we had on the first report a repair page wasn't detailed enough to determine, like, can this person actually, like, ask for these services. Another thing was to ask questions to help identify any assistance the resident might need to make the request. So even just asking them, do you need assistance with, like, another language, for instance? That was an idea that they thought would be useful for us to include. Some thought that the questions that we'd asked were a bit, like, were poorly worded and open to misinterpretation. So the exact instance of this was where we asked where the report is located. They felt that that could mean where in the property is it located, or what is the address of where the repair is happening. So having sort of more descriptive questions means that the resident knows exactly what type of information you're asking them for. I guess they're less likely to be confused by the questions that you're asking. Another comment on the crit was questions on the type of property and the floor of property are missing from the prototype. So in the prototype we don't ask the resident filling out the journey, like, where is the property, are they on the first floor, are they on the fourth floor, are they the last flat on the top floor of the property, things like that we don't ask, and they thought that was, like, a really integral point to sort of ask for in terms of helping to diagnose repair problems. The question about emergency repairs is a little ambiguous. So we have a list of, like, different emergency repairs, which we sort of gathered from different council sites, but there was, like, a little bit of nuance that was missing in the questions we asked, which is what the participants thought. So the question of I have no water, if that's an answer that they give, it could mean they don't have any hot water or no drinking water or no secondary water. So those questions aren't as straightforward as we sort of presented them to the residents. Provide the option for residents to add a video to the report. So the current prototype allows you to update or to upload a photo if you want to. They thought the option to upload, bless you, the option to upload a video could also be useful. And I'll just end on this quote, which is I thought was really summed up kind of what we're trying to do. A participant said, an online journey should provide added value for the resident and not just duplicate current internal processes. So yeah, that was the workshop.
So we took all the outputs of this work and the previous work and started to map the service pattern. And to give you an idea of what that looks like, again, using the example that Alex gave of the applying for an older person's bus pass, you can see that there are these different categories on the side. So we have the high-level stages, and then within these stages they have these sort of themes. So you could look at policy, best practice, research, what happened in the project to validate that this is the correct service pattern or an appropriate service pattern. Then you could delve deeper into the design and the code of that service pattern. So based on all of the work we did, we started building out our own. We began by having this step view of the process and tried to establish what reusable sub-patterns might fit within the whole service. So for example, communicate the problem, that could be its own pattern that then any council could take and reuse. So that was where we began, and then we tried to refine that to reach a higher level view of the pattern, and also we grappled with how to keep the service focused on the resident and the resident's own language, while still being clear about the council's responsibilities and the backstage actions that might happen at each stage of the pattern. So for example, we know that the resident might be involved in communicating the problem, but the organisation is the one that assesses the situation. So, like, how do you account for both of those in this pattern? And then also, because it's a non-linear process, how could the pattern address non-linear journeys? So we've got this kind of flow that it could go round in this section if it needed to. this then progressed, and we refined it further still to have a collaborative session where we kind of came up with these service pattern steps, which now are check eligibility to use the service, report a repair or problem, choose availability, confirm appointment, submit request, and get confirmation. And again, so these are user-focused language, is kind of how we framed this, and we've got high-level steps that we can then break down and look at the sub-patterns within that. So that's what we did next. So for each of those categories, we've kind of got them up here, and then we've got the councils and the users' needs along each of those steps. Some of the data points that need to be captured, and at the bottom we're capturing the evidence that supports that. So this is still a work in progress, but just to show you our thinking and where we're headed with it. We'll be capturing that research to validate and to also show the reasoning behind what was there, both from our own research but also secondary research and the original discovery report. So we are still reusing elements of what was there from before.
Right, technical discovery. So as I mentioned at the start, we've started a piece of technical discovery work this sprint. That's focusing on two main aims. Firstly, to assess the high-level data needs of the other systems in play in reporting our housing repair journey, and to map the sequencing of how data goes through those. So we've known right from the start and through discovery that the existing technology that supports the housing repairs process is one of the biggest constraints for changing the housing repairs process. But the good thing is there's actually not too many different flavours of the different systems that local authorities hang together in order to manage a housing repairs service, even though there's different suppliers active in there. So what we're doing is seeing what bit of data needs to pass from which system to the next, what's the sequencing of that, and understanding some of those technical constraints in more detail. Alongside that, we're reviewing the HACT data standard. If you're not aware of that, it's a data standard for managing housing, of which repairs is a particular sliver of that. The standard has been published and it's available for anyone to use, and we want to know whether the standard can support the reporting pattern and reporting journey that we're looking at. There's work still ongoing, but the conclusion looks like the data standard is workable, does map alongside the pattern, but it largely starts at the point at which we know what the work is. So at the point at which there is a job, there is an SOR code, that's where the standard comes into its own. It's less concerned with some of the checking eligibility, describing the problem, diagnosis parts of the journey where we've been doing some of our focusing. More next week on that. So, next steps. We will continue building and validating that service pattern. So that big board that Daria showed you, which we can share out so you can look at some of the detail, we'll continue to build that out. And as we do that, we'll be able to understand where we have the greatest confidence in elements that we're recommending for a pattern, and where perhaps we need to learn more, or where some of our riskiest assumptions are. So that will let us know where we have the most to learn or test for iterating the prototype. So taking the prototype that we built and designed in the first sprint, building out ideas for some of the other areas that we think are part of the pattern, getting that in front of residents and internal users so that we can validate or otherwise our ideas there. We'll also be developing the business and benefits case for continuing this work past alpha, so there's some number crunching to be done there. And we'll actively share this work with everyone involved, so we will be sharing all the outputs as we go along. If you want to see more, please do get in touch. We really want to make sure that particularly the customer services teams feel really involved in this and have a sense of ownership as we move through to implementation. Thank you very much.